Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Kyle Schultz. I am the Director of Global Strategic Initiatives with World Business Chicago. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this exchange. Thank you for your patience as we work through some technical difficulties on the back end. We'll begin the program with welcome remarks from Andy Zopp, CEO of World Business Chicago. Andy?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Or it's actually good morning. It's morning in Chicago. It's not morning in other places, including London. So welcome. We are thrilled to have you with us today for our London-Chicago venture capital exchange. So it's a really important topic where we're going to have an important discussion about the opportunities and for collaboration and innovation and economic recovery that is so important to both of our cities. It is another example of the important and deep relationship between Chicago and London, and between World Business Chicago and London and partners. In 2016, then Mayor Emanuel and Mayor Khan came to the United States, made his first trip to the United States, and came to Chicago, where he met with Mayor Emanuel, and they signed an economic development agreement between our two cities. Since then, London has been a leading source of foreign direct investment for Chicago, and we have had numerous companies come and expand and grow in Chicago, close to 100, bringing close to 2,000 jobs. We have had several international exchanges between our two cities. We made 3 trips to London, official trips to London from Chicago, 2 last year, including I had the privilege of attending London Tech Week last year, and had opportunity to participate in a number of meetings. This partnership has run, and last fall, Laura Citrone, the president of London, CEO of London and Partners, brought a delegation of tech companies to Chicago. So that's just some examples of the long relationship that we've had that has helped us both grow our cities. Of course, in the last few months, the world and our economy has dramatically changed because of COVID-19. Both our cities, London and Chicago, have worked hard to keep people safe, but have had devastating impacts on our economy. And so we've been focused here in Chicago not only on keeping people safe, but also on recovery. Mayor Lightfoot, back in April, convened over 100 business partners, community leaders, civic leaders to form the Economic Recovery Task Force. They worked for several months to come up with a plan and a report to think through how we think about recovering and bringing back our economy as we start to continue to manage this pandemic. We released that report a couple of weeks ago on July 9th, and we're very proud of the work that it focused on. It focuses on 6 areas, including addressing traumas new and old, developing on new opportunities created by COVID, building on our current strengths, highlighting our brand so that we can tell our story even better, and working to bring partners together to continue to grow our economy. The other part of that report that we're very proud about is that it talks really about how we can use this moment in time to change some of the inequities. Here in the States, COVID has had a horrible impact on communities of color in particular, and highlighted some of the economic disparities. And so we intend to use this as an opportunity to rebuild our economy in a more inclusive way. Innovation is going to play a critical role, as it had previously in both our economies, and as it has in responding to COVID. Here in the States, we've had innovative companies do everything from find ways to create PPE from 3D printers, build ventilators with 3D printers. We had a company create a website and a platform where we could have small businesses buy and purchase and exchange PPE. They've been at the forefront of helping us to recover, and they're helping us to respond to the virus. And the innovation ecosystem is going to be at the forefront of helping us recover, both here in Chicago and in London. And so this is a very important discussion that we're having today about the strength of both of our cities' innovation ecosystems and the companies that are growing there and thriving there, and how we can continue to work together. So it is the right topic, it's the right time, and this is the right place, and we're really thrilled to have you with us today. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my counterpart at London Partners, Jonathan Daniels, the Vice President of London Partners, who's going to speak further about our collaboration and about what we hope to happen today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy, and for the World Business Chicago team for your partnership and for hosting, particularly to you and to Tom. And to Kyle and Avan at Chicago Next, and for, of course, our panelists and for everyone who's joined us for the conversation. As you've mentioned, Andy, London Partners is London's international trade, investment, and promotion agency. We have a similar mandate. For those not familiar with us, we create, in broad terms, we create good growth for London in a similar way as World Business Chicago is invested in inclusive growth in Chicago. I'm Jonathan Daniel, I'm the Vice President here, based in Chicago, covering the Midwest with my colleague Katie Higgs, who some of you may have interacted with. We both started during COVID times in the last few months, so we are entirely on Zoom with our colleagues and partners across the region. We support companies expanding into London, and which is hopefully their first foray abroad. And London companies, importantly, London companies succeeding here in Chicago and the region, and investing and creating good jobs in communities across the city. We're pleased to work with under normal circumstances, and for this event with World Business Chicago and with our colleagues at the UK Department for International Trade, some of whom colleagues from which are on the line now. As Andy's said, the genesis for this event, just to share a bit about the inspiration and where we'll go with the conversation with the panelists, is really this originated from a desire mutually between Chicago and London to celebrate our links and strengths between our tech and innovation ecosystems. That there's been, in addition to London Partners investing ourselves in the city of Chicago by virtue of Katie and myself being here, based, and in fact I am in the office now as well, but being based here normally, the relationship is demonstrated by Chicago companies, notable Chicago companies investing in London in the last couple of years, including G2 Crowd and Cameo, and most recently a crisis communications platform called Intelligent, a Chicago-based tech company, which set up in London entirely during COVID, without any plane rides to and fro. And so I think that is for us a helpful inspiration in this time, and a reinforcement that our ecosystems matter and our partnerships matter, and that's what we like to foster and celebrate with this conversation. As mentioned, London and Chicago, of course, are both cities, global cities of great diversity, and we both have mandates from our mayors, from Mayor Lightfoot here and from Mayor Khan in London, to include more of our human capital in our growth sectors. And I know our panelists agree with that as well, share that value. And as we think about economic recovery during and post-COVID, hopefully we'll have a post-COVID soon, inclusion and sustainability emerge, I think for all of us as values that we share mutually. And so at the foundation is a belief that we'll need the best of ourselves and the best of each other to restore prosperity and also rebuild our societies in a fairer and more sustainable way, hopefully. So that's what today's discussion is about. We're honored to have you and to have panelists. We've selected panelists and a moderator who many of you may be familiar with, are all leading lights in Chicago and London ecosystems, not just because they're some you may want to know when you're raising capital, but also to see where the industry where the industry is moving in tech and innovation in our cities. So the challenges abound, and hopefully we can all take inspiration from from their insights, perspectives, and where they're thinking, what they're able to share with us over the next hour. So our moderator, who we'll introduce now, is Ms. Rumi Morales, the partner and head of venture at Outlier Ventures. She is, Outlier Ventures is headquartered in London, actually, as a venture advisory firm specializing in partnering and investing at the convergence of blockchains, AI, IoT, and robotics. She's an expert in digital currency and blockchain, and a Forbes contributor, regularly featured in The Economist, Bloomberg, and more, and active in Chicago civic life and normally based here. Many of you will know her, but she is currently grabbing Wi-Fi from a McDonald's parking lot in Michigan. So we will hopefully everything stays constant on your Wi-Fi connection, and we look forward to the conversation. Over to you, Rumi.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, indeed, I am sitting outside of McDonald's. This background doesn't show it, but if you hear anyone knocking on my window and telling me to move, you'll understand why. So thank you so much for joining. As Jonathan mentioned, I am a partner at Outlier Ventures, which is headquartered in London, but I am myself based in Chicago, where I've been living for the past 10 years. I think that I've been asked to give just a few remarks about the state of innovation before introducing the panelists. And as I think about the state of innovation in both cities, I guess I really just want to emphasize really our cultural DNA that's based on innovation. I actually began my career in London. Now I'm going to date myself incredibly badly here, but when I started off my venture career in London, the Spice Girls were all the rage, and Tony Blair had just swept into power, and Princess Diana passed away, but everyone was listening to Oasis. I mean, there was so much going on, and I really felt like I was at the heart of something very brilliant. And it's funny because I moved to London only thinking about its past history, not really thinking necessarily how important its present was and how energized and creative the people are. And it's interesting to me now when I'm a partner at Outlier, how many years later, I still sense that. But when I go to London, it looks really different than it did back in 1997. If I look at the growth and the new industries, I'm thinking, well, this is really part of London's cultural DNA. Very similarly, I moved to Chicago, not knowing much about it, but was astonished to find what I only knew of as America's third largest city after New York and Los Angeles actually had a tremendous amount of greenfield opportunity. There's no barrier necessarily for success. There's not excess competition saying, oh, you can't go in one place or you can't do this or the other. I'm reminded how people like Oprah Winfrey or Barack Obama, they were not from Chicago, but they found their niche, they found their space, they found their success in Chicago. It's a great town that really enables entrepreneurs, gutsy thinking, and has the ability to transform a whole bunch of new industries. So as we're thinking about moving forward, obviously we're all thinking about COVID and coronavirus, but obviously there were some other important trends that were taking place as well. In London, which had been fashioning itself, I think, primarily around financial services and fintech, Brexit revealed a number of flaws, not just in the thinking of London as a sole financial center for Europe, but also about the people and what people really want and what they're clamoring for. You look at the differences between England versus Scotland and Northern Ireland, who had very different views on what it meant to be part of the European Union. So you think about those trends in conjunction with climate change, in conjunction with other issues around privacy and so on and so forth that are really taking hold in Europe and what that means. And then layer coronavirus on top of it, layer this pandemic and what are the opportunities and challenges there. And similarly, in Chicago, we found a city that was starting to be transformed with technology through the rise of innovation. 1871 and Matter and MHub. We have a new mayor focused on improving the economic opportunities in the south and west side of Chicago, taking a look at some of our traditional industries like manufacturing and supply chain and thinking, what are the opportunities here? Is there more here to transform the entire city? And then put coronavirus on top of that and its effect, particularly on Black and Brown communities. And you have to think more about economic equity and how to really make sure that everyone gets to be able to participate in the transformation of our economies that we know will happen And through our efforts, everyone on this call, trying to build new businesses and create new jobs post-COVID. But there are undoubtedly challenges here, but there are opportunities too. And that's why I think it's fantastic that we all have the opportunity here to listen to my fellow panelists as they talk about their businesses, their priorities, and the state of innovation in London and Chicago and how we can work together going forward. So with that, I'm gonna introduce the panelists one by one in alphabetical order. If you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about each of yourselves, your firm, and then we can dig into the questions. So Chingona Ventures, Samara, you are up first.
Hi, Rumi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. So yes, my name is Samara Mejia Hernandez, and I'm a founding partner of Chingona Ventures. Chingona means badass woman in Spanish, and I'm investing in badass founders at the earliest stages, often overlooked in terms of their background, in terms of industries and business models. The fund was launched last year. We've made now 11 investments so far across fintech, future of work, femtech, food, health and wellness, and ed tech. And we look at industries that are often overlooked, that are growing, but not always well understood by the traditional investor. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to talk about London and Chicago. It's been almost 11 years since I've been to London, but there is a lot of similarities in Chicago and London. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
Thanks so much, Samara. Yvonne Bajella, Impact X. Please introduce yourself and your firm.
Thank you. So my name is Yvonne Bajella. I'm a founder member and principal at Impact X. Impact X is a UK-based venture capital fund, and we focus on backing underrepresented founders across Europe and the US. We typically focus on the seed and Series A stages, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today. I totally agree with Samara in that there's a lot of similarities between, London and Chicago, and we could definitely delve a bit deeper into that and look at the opportunities to innovate going forward.
Thanks so much. Jonathan Ellis from the Tallest Angel, Sandalphon Capital.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Ellis. I'm the founder of Sandalphon Capital. I'm probably the most confusing person on this session today because I'm another Jonathan with a beard and I'm British, but I'm in Chicago. So I actually moved here for 6 months for a work placement about 13 years ago. And about 4 years ago, I started Sandalphon. So we focus on the earliest stages of investing, so pre-seed through Series A. We have a regional focus. So half our portfolio is in Chicago, but we spend a lot of time floating around the Midwest. And we really lean into regional strengths. So enterprise tech, fintech, insurtech, real estate tech or prop tech, healthcare, food tech, a lot of regional strengths to lean into. So, we are fairly generalist. And I'm also the founder of Midwest Tech Connect, which is a new initiative to try and create more connectivity across the region as well. Yeah, thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you. And finally, Andrew Wordsworth from Sustainable Ventures.
Hi, everyone, and good morning or afternoon. So I co-founded Sustainable Ventures in 2011 with a vision of a world in which the twin challenges of climate change and resource scarcity were addressed through commercial solutions. Since then, we've either launched, invested in, or provided support services to around about 200 sustainable and clean tech companies. We've created a unique ecosystem in support, which is underpinned by our workspaces sites near London Bridge, which is now kind of Europe's largest cluster of clean tech and sustainable startups with about 450 entrepreneurs and innovators at its core. We are one of the most active UK investors in the sector. We've got a portfolio of 22 investments in future energy, mobility, prop tech, agri-tech, and circular economy verticals. Overall, I think our support sort of helps startups and SMEs to grow from kind of beer mat through to exit, whilst also delivering long-term sustainability benefits to the planet.
Great, thank you so much. Now we'll just join in a round of questions, and please, to everyone who's watching right now, feel free to submit questions in the chat function. Hopefully we're all familiar with Zoom. And if you click chat, you can type your question into me privately directly or to all the panelists, and we'll be happy to incorporate them and get them answered for you. So first, as we're looking kind of broadly then at the innovation ecosystems, Jonathan, I'm going to put you on the spot first. As you said, you have a very unique perspective, but I was wondering if you would first talk a little bit about the Midwest. Like you said, you're only going to be here for 6 months. I likewise had no idea I was going to move here for 10 years when I first moved here either. So what is it about the innovation ecosystem in Chicago in particular that made you want to stay and makes you want to continue to build your business here?
I mean, it's just on the rise. And like, that's something to sort of get on board with. You know, we have all the elements, I think, that the ecosystem needs. We have talent, both, you know, emerging from, you know, some top schools. We have talent emerging from Fortune 500s that either have, you know, offices here or, you know, headquarters here. We have capital, both locally, regionally, and also coastally and internationally is now showing up as well, particularly after the very earliest stages. And so it has all of the ingredients. We've got, you know, initiatives like 1871 is world-class, Matter is world-class. We have these incubators and accelerator programs which are really helping create critical mass of ideas, talent, capital, connectivity, and that's really exciting. And then on the regional scale, you know, every sort of city sort of around Chicago really does have sort of a gravitational force, I think, within the Midwest. But you know, every other city around it does have its sort of own strengths as well, given, you know, the industry's there, and then Chicago is such a regional hub for commerce and transit. It's just a great place to be and sort of try and touch the whole region.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but have you considered ever going back to London to let's answer that in a nice way, though, to tee up the second question about the innovation ecosystem in London. But what are some strengths you see in London? And I'll pass it off to another panelist.
So from what I've heard of London, I haven't spent any time looking into the innovation ecosystem in London. I'm aware it is also on the rise, and I continually see London people showing up in the US at events like London and Partners, or you know, people from like Here East or at South by Southwest. You know, there's people constantly popping up all over the place. So, you know, again, keeping back to connectivity and the importance of that. But in terms of moving back, I don't know. I'm now spent most of my professional career here. My network's here, so I think I'll stay for now.
Okay. So Yvonne, if you wouldn't mind jumping in and sharing more about the kind of the startup community and the VC community in London and how they work together and create that type of conversational ecosystem around innovation in London.
Yeah, so I think one of the great things about London is it's home to a big startup community in terms of it's a window of innovation for European and global markets. And because of that, it's home to a number of accelerators, incubators, and it's really fostered this spirit of innovation, whereby the UK is also home to, you know, 8 of the leading 20 universities here in Europe, which means that there is this spirit of innovation that has been born within the UK. And the great thing is with COVID-19, we've actually seen a lot of collaboration between multiple stakeholders along the innovation chain. For example, universities are currently gaining easier access to industry, and the trust and mutual understanding that's being built between research and industry could continue beyond this pandemic. And I think it's great to see. So I think that, you know, it's just been great seeing, I've been in the investment industry for 5 years now, and it's just been great seeing the number of accelerators, number of incubators really increase, and the level of funding as well. So traditionally, you know, fundraising for new funds was quite difficult for UK funds. However, this year alone, we've seen over 30 new funds actually emerge within the ecosystem, which has meant there's more money going into startups, more money being plugged into the ecosystem, and more innovation being birthed because of that.
That's great. And are those funds across different industries, or do you find that they have specific focuses? Do they tend to be more targeted in their investment thesis, or are they more generalist?
I think they're generally more generalist. What we've seen is particularly a lot of earlier stage funds, so pre-seed, seed funds, which is great to see, because oftentimes it's at that very early stage where it has been difficult to raise funding for early stage companies. And so even in this pandemic, we haven't seen the decline that we had expected in the levels of funding. And I think in part that's due to the number of new funds that have raised.
That's really interesting. Andrew, regarding the coronavirus as well, has that changed the companies that you're looking at? You know, Yvonne just mentioned that you had more sources of capital, but I'm also wondering, have the companies changed, or are you looking for something different now from companies themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I guess with a lot of people, you sort of try and sort of read the runes in terms of good thing, bad thing, and so on. I would say, I mean, I observed that kind of pre-crisis, clean tech, felt like its time had sort of come. It's been in the wilderness for probably sort of, well, for at least 10 years and so on. But I think gradually as people have got to understand more about the sector, people have, it was sort of on a roll, whether it's the Greta Thunberg effect, I'm not sure, but the consumers seem to have finally got it. But as a result, we sort of had a look at, and we took a sort of a review. We continued to invest through the crisis. But I guess, it has ruled out companies which are particularly the early stage where you're basically funding them just to tread water. So there are lots of things to do. So there've been a couple of companies that we sort of just put on pause to do that. But what it has thrown up is this whole sort of new opportunities. You mentioned sort of robotics. Very interesting that we probably wouldn't have looked at a robotics company, but starting to realize what they could do in terms of sort of entering sort of the sort of kind of a great sort of product in terms of the food preparation sector. So sort of the areas where it's very difficult for people to socially distance, but still need to do that sort of stuff. So I think that's, for example, one example of where new things have come up, new opportunities are there. Obviously, we don't do stuff in med tech, but we're seeing a lot of interest, obviously, in that side of things. So, yeah, and other things, sort of home delivery. I mean, you can just see what's happening on the stock markets to those companies involved in that side of things. So, it is a question about sort of finding sort of good value companies that are going to prosper from a kind of what might become the new normal.
Right. And can I ask you, sorry, kind of you just don't do med tech, but there are things like robotics that might fall under the Sustainable Ventures umbrella too. So what extent are you willing or able to extend the Sustainable Ventures thesis to include some new companies that are being created in this coronavirus environment? Or at what point can you also say, no, I don't understand this, or this is not for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, we took a view quite early on that if it's not delivering a kind of carbon reductions or reductions in emissions, in material usage, for example, it's not delivering an obvious sustainability with no kind of green premium, then we don't touch it. We've had companies that have sort of pivoted into pure tech, yeah, we don't add enough value to them, and it all goes horribly wrong. So we kind of learned our lessons the hard way. But one of the interesting things about sort of sustainability in those is that it's very difficult. When clean tech used to be kind of renewables, basically, it was a lot easier. But now we're sort of seeing sustainable things in food and drink companies, people looking at sort of sustainable supply, looking at sort of protein replacements. You're looking at whole sort of traditional sectors that have been existing. Agriculture has existed in the same form for thousands and thousands of years, and now suddenly you've got people looking at sort of soldier flies and sort of protein replacement and so on. And it's those kind of disruptions that are happening. And I think if anything, this crisis is probably going to accelerate some of those sort of longer term trends that we saw.
That's really interesting. Samara, similarly, I don't mean to combine both Yvonne and Andrew's questions for you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the fundraising and fund environment here in Chicago, together with any changing of companies that you've seen, startups trying to access capital, or companies taking a pivot. Has coronavirus really impacted the innovation scene in Chicago, in your view?
Yeah, happy to chat through that. Also, there's something going on outside, so you might hear sirens. I don't kind of just stop, but in case you do, just let me know. Yeah, so in terms of where we thought we would be a few months ago, you know, we had this discussion early in April, March, and we thought, okay, deal flow was going to decrease, valuations were going to go down, people weren't going to invest or feel comfortable investing just over Zoom. And I actually have not seen that drastically change. As a matter of fact, I've actually lost like 2 deals because I wasn't quick enough. And if you look at the actual numbers, I believe they came out for the second quarter, the amount of dollars invested all over the United States, as well as deals invested, did go down compared to the first quarter or compared to the same time last year. But, you know, maybe that was, in terms of what I saw that deals continue to be done. High quality deals did come through the door. And maybe that was self-selecting of some companies that were like, hey, I had a hard time raising even pre-COVID. Let me just hold off, get some more traction, and then come back out to market. And those companies that had already gotten a term sheet and the rounds pretty much closed decided to raise an additional round of funding just to get them through a longer time frame in terms of runway. So I saw a lot of that happening. There is, I would say, probably a higher bar for some investors that want to see more traction, more early validation. You know, when I invest, it's at the pre-seed stage, so it's super early. So you're not necessarily going to have huge revenue growth numbers. Maybe it's pre-product, pre-revenue, but there's some sort of kind of validation that the company provides. So in terms of the fundraising ecosystem, I think that it's actually a great opportunity for some investors. Valuations haven't necessarily gone down, you know, call it 50% or more, but we've seen them come down 20 to 30%, or companies raise at the last round's valuation just to get them through a little bit further. So I think that it is a good opportunity for those investors that are willing to write checks over Zoom and take on more risk. Where I see a little bit of a harder time fundraising is probably at the Series A, Series B, when investors typically want to go into the offices, want to meet the entrepreneurs in person, want to see the team, right? That's a little bit harder to do over Zoom, but that hasn't necessarily stopped completely. And then particularly in the Midwest, I would say that there's 2 white spaces. So one is in the pre-seed, super early, where compared to markets like San Francisco or others, there's a smaller angel network. There's a smaller, you know, kind of the companies like the Facebooks and Googles that were early employees and got a big payout, and some of these other cities were able to then invest it back into the community as angels. We don't have we have that, but we don't have it, you know, obviously as much as some other cities. So I think that that's changing, and I see that growing, which is positive. But I also see more funds coming into market in the pre-seed stage, which I think is positive. And then other areas, New York, San Francisco, and LA, I see other investors coming into the Midwest and seeing these opportunities earlier on, which I'm excited about. And then the second space for white space in the Midwest is at the growth stage. So many companies that can get to the true seed or Series A, you know, can get funding. But when it comes to that growth stage, there's still a lack or an opportunity for more growth capital to come into the market.
Thank you. And then talking a little bit more about that ecosystem in Chicago and Midwest, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, you conducted a survey recently, right, of VCs in the area. Were there any interesting findings or anything that surprised you as you looked at the innovation ecosystem here in Chicago from their perspective?
Yeah, so we surveyed about 100 VCs and about 200 founders, or at least we have that many responses. We tried to get more. We did it in April. And so it was an interesting time to do it because I think that was when, you know, COVID-19 was really hitting and really the world froze up. So a few takeaways there. One, at the time, I'd say like the brakes were really getting pumped in terms of sort of investment activity. I think suddenly everyone was scrambling to like look after their portfolio, and all the founders that were either about to fundraise were sort of fighting fires as well. So everything sort of really stopped in April. Since then, though, we've seen more and more activity returning. So, I think that was very much like an April specific thing. You can kind of see it in some of the numbers that are out there. So we're seeing like a recovery now. Valuation expectations, people thought were going to be down sort of 20 to 30%, which kind of makes sense given, valuation is a function of growth as much as anything, and growth is slowing. Headwinds are greater, risks are going up. So that does make sense. But for hot deals which are benefiting or like really booming during these times, then the valuations are the same, if not higher. So I'd say it was very much a sector specific, like lots of idiosyncrasies. So there are some sectors that just don't work right now that are sort of higher touch. Certain verticals like hospitality is obviously been hit really hard by this. So the experience for different founders or different VCs focused on different areas, I think, is varied. But again, it's that's improving. And my sense is we can have like funding probably down like 50% this year. I think startup activity is still as great. And it feels like we're probably in 2008 equivalent now, and next year will be 2009, which was like the best year, like for venture returns. And I think it was like the start of the recovery. So I'm kind of optimistic for the future there.
Thank you. And I realize we've been talking a lot about coronavirus, but there are some other very important, what's the best word for 2020, right, that have been going on around us. Certainly here in the United States, spurred by the terrible passing of George Floyd and others regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, but we've seen protests spread across the country and across the world, including in the United Kingdom. And obviously it underscores beyond a lot of racial injustices as we think about our industry, the fact that there is not equality yet in the startup and the venture space. There are a number of underrepresented entrepreneurs. Yvonne, this is a space that your firm works on and has been focused on for some length of time. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some practical steps, some real steps based on your experience and your firm's experience that VCs and founders can take to improve racial diversity in our space.
Yeah, sure. I think from my perspective, over the last few couple of weeks, this has obviously been a topic that has, come to the forefront. And there's been a number of, VCs that have reached out to me personally and said, how can we do more to ensure that we're investing in underrepresented entrepreneurs? And I think it's great that we are seeing more office hours being offered to underrepresented entrepreneurs and Black founders and so on. But we have to move beyond that and, tackle the real issue with the lack of funding, because there's no shortage of incredible underrepresented Black founders out there. So, for example, last year we saw, 700 in London alone. And so proactive steps need to be taken in order to do that. And whether that means tapping into, communities where these entrepreneurs typically reside. And I guess another key thing is for funds and accelerators that are not currently tracking diversity metrics, even if they don't have any underrepresented founders within their portfolios. I think it's very important that those metrics do start to be tracked and commitments are made as to what it should look like. Because, we'll be remembered in, say, year, 5 year, and 10 years time from now, what actions are being taken and the change that's truly going to happen. And it does take taking that proactive change, as we've seen when it comes to, gender diversity, for example, in recent years, where it has been data driven. And also just, connecting with individuals within the space that have experience investing in underrepresented founders. I think it's really difficult to care about issues that you have no connection with. And so for many individuals that, maybe don't understand the challenges that females or founders of color face, I think it's really important to, again, be proactive, get out there, tap into those networks where they reside and try to understand the challenges that they face, because you can't effectively address the issue if you don't have an understanding of the issue that these founders face.
Right. And kind of similarly, Samara, with Chingona Ventures, your focus being on entrepreneurs and founders that are not always well understood by the traditional investor. Do you think traditional investors will be changing their understanding now, given recent dynamics, or is there still a ways to go? And how are you working with your founders in this changing environment?
Yeah, so I'm hopeful. You know, in the past, I think the conversation was very much around the pipeline problem, not a focus. If it was, it wasn't being tracked. It was kind of just, you know, more for a PR perspective. And at first, when people were having these conversations, I just like, how real is this, right? How are people building an infrastructure to continue to build this out at their firms, not just for now and for a tweet, but more for kind of the longer term? And it starts with tracking. It starts with being super honest with yourself and saying, okay, how does my portfolio look? And then what are we going to do to address it? What are specific goals? And I have felt a lot of positive inbound from corporate VCs, from corporations, from other venture capitalists, from really large venture capitalists that are saying, we know where we're at and it's not where we want to be. And so they're, one, partnering with investors like myself and Yvonne that are focusing on these founders at the pre-seed stage. And then helping them with one deal flow. They're making investments in diverse, and when I say diverse, particularly racially diverse fund managers, which I think is positive. You know, and then they're looking at it internally to see in their current investor committee, how many of these are racially diverse investors. And so there's a few venture funds that have come out with venture fellows programs and others. So I feel positive about this because the discussions have continued and have actually ramped up. And so, but the real proof of this is how many checks will be written into these founders, how many hires will be made into these founders or employees or investors, how many promotions will be done, and then how many investments will be made into these diverse fund managers. So again, I think I feel positive, and there has been a lot more kind of PR around this, and I hope to continue this conversation. But lastly, I will say that this is an investment opportunity. This is something that is, I continue to say, is overlooked in that it is a growing demographic. They're in growing markets. They have a real business idea. It's not charity. It's not, you know, a good thing for the world, and investors are missing out. So if you as an investor have a fiduciary responsibility to find the best investments, and you're not looking at the entire landscape of founders or businesses, then you're not, you know, being fiduciary responsible for your LPs. And so that's just what I would say about that. Right.
Great points. And Andrew, on the environment and the sustainability front that you're a specialist in, I liked your comment previously that you felt like your time had come and then, right, this other thing had happened. But what do you think, like we talk about a post-COVID world, how much will your business have changed? Do you think you'll see more fund investors going into sustainability? Will they see it as separate from COVID or integrated? I'm just wondering how you view the future momentum of groups and companies in your space.
Sure. Yeah. Just before I answer that, just to add something on the diversity point, and there's a particular focus around sort of gender in the UK, and the UK government has just introduced an initiative called the Investing in Women Code, which investors are all being to sign up with, and that's the sort of first step of actually collecting data in terms of number of applicants that are either sort of all female, all male, or mixed founders groups, and also how they progress through your stages, to see, so that everyone's encouraged to track data and sort of centralize that. So it's a small step, but it's one that, you know, I think it's great to see, and we signed up to our investment director, Susanna McClintock, is one of the leading proponents of women in clean tech and represents the mayor on this issue. So I think it's encouraging, but there's obviously a long way to go. And again, same probably applies to people of colour. Certainly, we see that in our industry, and I think but it's great. So just into the environment. Yes, let's talk about this. I think as people understand what this means, and it comes back to consumers, and so whether consumers are they all have pensions, and therefore that's influencing investors and institutional investors, and we're seeing that cascading all the way down. We are regularly approached even now for companies, because obviously it's an incredible niche, if you like, so nobody's been doing it, really been focusing on this area, looking for that, how do you address things, sort of, particularly through the sort of the communication medium of the sustainable development goals, sustainable development goals. But I think one of the challenges is, I would say one of the concerns is it's not enough to just stick kind of ESG, a sort of ESG badge. It's not enough to just do a sort of an impact report and produce it, unless you actually understand what that actually means and what makes a successful kind of sustainable company. So I think that's a challenge. I certainly think there's lots of people looking at it. There's lots of sort of LPs are asking established investors. We're seeing the Founders Factory, who many of you are aware of, in London, big sort of tech kind of incubator, has now started a kind of a net zero incubation stream. Tech Nation, which is the kind of the industry body, again, has started a net zero competition. So I sort of see more and more people are sort of coming into that space. I hope they don't come in too quickly, because they'll drive entry valuations up. But anyway, I think, I'm joking. It's a really great thing for the sector. I guess the other side of things is we are also seeing a lot more kind of deal flow coming out of universities. So it feels like with the sort of, I would call them millennials or that kind of generation, people are focusing their PhDs on solving environmental issues, or solving climate change issues, and then they're taking that research and spinning out into a new company. So we track through the work we do with the Greater London Authority. We deliver a support program for them, and I would say compared to this time next year, we're seeing probably twice the number of sort of really early stage companies coming out of kind of London's. There are about 40 higher education institutions in London, and we're seeing that number steadily creeping up. So I say all around, it feels like all the metrics are sort of moving in the right direction.
On that last point, though, I find it very interesting. Obviously, as a deep tech investor, I see this as well, with some very interesting advanced technologies coming out of universities. The question is, do you have the business leadership and the commercial capabilities to create it and run it as a business? Do these people have skills, the requisite skills, or how are you working with these academic partners or newly minted PhDs to transform their ideas into companies?
Sure. Well, the core of what we do is that we run an accelerator fund where we basically work with companies. We do sort of pre-seed investing and then work with those companies over a 12-month period. To the best of our knowledge, we were certainly, when we set it up in 2017, we were the only accelerator of that type. Lots of fintech, lots of mad tech, lots of sort of deep tech kind of incubators. One of the investors in one of the companies we span out said that as long as you've got the engineers, you can always find managers. If you've got managers, it's very difficult to find the engineers. And I think there's quite a lot of truth in that. Again, because it's interesting as a sector, we're getting lots of people coming out of sort of experienced managers who might be in corporates looking to come in and do something kind of worthwhile with their lives. So I'm not too concerned about that. But as I say, it's great to see more PhDs, and scientists coming out with relevant products.
Right. It's funny. Outlier Ventures has the same response. We have an accelerator as well. We found that it's a very highly effective and efficient way to quickly help a bunch of really smart people commercialize their technologies.
Yeah.
We have a question. I'm going to spin this on to Jonathan first, but others are welcome to answer it more broadly. But this is from Mihir Milani, who is actually in a fintech startup in Mumbai. He says they're bootstrapped and profitable, and they're focused on capital markets, risk management, and surveillance. Mihir and his team, they're interested in Chicago as their preferred choice for expansion, as Chicago is a hub of financial markets. But he's wondering if you have any specific suggestions for a startup like theirs, given the fact that they are in India with no existing clients or a presence in the United States. How do you come to Chicago? How do you expand abroad? Specifically in his case, as a fintech startup focused on capital markets, risk management, and surveillance?
I'd say two things. One, I think digitally start to get a little bit of a footprint, connecting with prospective customers, try and build a pipeline, try and build leads. I do get pitched sometimes from people who aren't local, and if there's no connection to the US yet, it's really hard. If you have early signs that there's sort of a demand for your product building, even if it's not finished yet, then that's helpful. And they didn't pay me to do this, but I'm going to plug Chicago Next and World Business Chicago, because they have resources to help people that are interested in relocating to Chicago. I don't know much about them. You can follow up with them after this, but I think that would be a good place to check out as well.
That's right. You do have the experts on the phone, both with London and Partners and World Business Chicago. But Yvonne or Andrew, do you have any suggestions for a startup that's not based in the UK, but is interested in coming to the UK and building the business in London in particular? Any words of advice?
Again, I would suggest London and Partners. I've worked with the organization, and I know that a few founders that have found them very helpful coming from outside of the UK. I'd also say that we're in a very interesting time at the moment, right, whereby people are becoming more accustomed to working remotely, and so it's almost set up the stage for distributed teams, and so that's one of the ways you may want to consider testing out working in different environments as well. But otherwise, London and Partners is definitely the organization that you want to reach out to.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew, please.
No, I was just going to say, so I think one of the things about London is because it is it's got quite a lot of scale in terms of sort of tech startups and so on. So particularly in this case, as a result, there are certain sector specific. So level 39, which is part of Canary Wharf, is purely focused on fintech. So it's very possible to sort of move in with like-minded people who are sort of in the similar sector. I mean, certainly our kind of sector, we obviously run a workspace. It's very cooperative, it's very supportive, and you can get that kind of peer-to-peer support that goes on, which means you're not just moving to, picking an office and sort of trying to find your way. There's lots of people who can introduce you to that ecosystem. And as I say, things I mentioned, sort of Tech Nation, is set up to basically provide that support as well. We're a founder member of Clean Tech London, which is with the London Partners, and the GLA and other public. Again, it's about creating that kind of welcoming infrastructure. And the key objective of that is to look for talented entrepreneurs with solutions that can come into the space.
Right. Yeah, and I think as well for Chicago and fintech, which is kind of my background too, as mentioned in my opening remarks, Chicago is a massive city, but with a lot of greenfield opportunities, and I've found that everyone here is very collaborative, And certainly in the fintech space, if you are interested in helping to build our ecosystem, every door is kind of open to you as long as you're smart and have a good idea, right? I haven't found anyone in Chicago that's going to outright say, no, you're not from here, so you can't play in our playground. But rather, you're more than welcome to come and network, even beyond the great opportunities and guidance that World Business Chicago and Chicago Next provides. But there are groups like FinTechs and the FinTech Exchange, and Jonathan has a bunch of FinTech groups as well, I think, that you're affiliated or familiar with. We all kind of circle around. So if anything, you have the right people on this call right now. So just reach out to us later, and we're happy to make the appropriate connections for you.
Hey, Rim, one of the things, just to quickly add to this, I just talked to a company yesterday from London, and they were looking for investors, and they were actually, we talked with a Chicago investor. And one of the things that I found that was attractive is it didn't really matter to the point around where they were based, because everyone's remote and that's going to continue. But they were getting early validation in the US market in particular. They were growing, even though they were based in the UK. And then also, in particular in Chicago, they were getting some early validation, and they were hiring their next 2 or 3 employees in Chicago. So while they weren't here necessarily, it felt like they were here. And many Midwest funds have a focus on the Midwest, or have an LP that you kind of have to check the box of have some employees here. So just to add on to everything else, it's just, if you want to make yourself kind of stand out and feel a little bit more attractive to the Midwest, it's having a case of why a Midwest investor, why it makes sense, a value out of the community, customers, but also that you're getting some early validation here, and so that your story makes sense of why you're in India, but you're raising money in Chicago in particular.
Right. And for those who are not as familiar perhaps with those in London, Chicago, and I know previous Mayor Rahm Emanuel would love to say this, but he's absolutely right in pointing out that there's no industry that's more than 13-14% of Chicago's GDP, of our own economy. You have everyone here, from food to manufacturing to financial services to health tech, right, or healthcare, consumer goods, so on and so forth. So the number of potential customers that you have in this region, and then extended out more broadly into the Midwest, isn't like anything else that you'll find in other parts of the United States. So that's one incredible reason that I think any startup should want to consider expanding in Chicago. There's also another interesting question from Tony Thomas, talking about regionally focused venture capital. And Samara, you just raised this point as well, that there's some funds in Chicago that need to check the box when it comes to, are you investing in the Midwest? But so a question is there a way for startups to access capital in London and vice versa, perhaps through collaboration between VCs? Are there venture capital firms collaborating across the pond that could assist their startups in accessing capital and achieving greater international ambitions? Are you aware of any, or do you have any informal relationships with perhaps Andrew or Yvonne? Do you work with any US and particularly Chicago-based venture firms? If not, there are 2 people on this call who I know would be happy to work with you. Or Jonathan, Samara, likewise, do you ever work with London VC firms? Would you consider having greater collaboration so that we can promote these types of capital ties for our portfolios to mutually benefit from?
You want me to take that, Samara? I memean, I do occasionally get reached out to by a few firms out of London in particular. Like Anthemis is one, White Oak I think is another. So there's London-based firms, European-based firms that are sort of looking here, and they're just trying to get access to early-stage deal flow, and that's great. And often, if there is a international expansion story, it makes sense to get them involved to help that play out. And then equally, there's a whole bunch of like micro VC funds. I'm one, and we're sort of relatively small funds, relatively limited resources. So we sort of stay focused on an opportunity set we can really deal with. But there are other bigger funds that have national or international focus. Funds not even in Chicago, but others in the region are also looking outside. It's all about just getting in front of them in a smart way. Everyone hates warm intros. I hate warm intros. I have to do a lot of them as well. but like that is one way in, is just find someone in the network, a founder in the network that can introduce, reach out cold, but have like a really good tailored email, so it's not just a mass blast out to people. Like, show you've done some research on why they make sense. So they are there. I think London and Partners and World Business Chicago, trying to do more to build the bridges between them as well, and like help with that connectivity. But I think on both sides there is sort of capital that goes beyond just its local footprint.
Yvonne or Andrew, can you talk about any cross-Atlantic or transatlantic collaborations that you have, if any?
Yeah, sure. So from our perspective, we actually have 20 founding members at ImpactX, whereby these are individuals that have invested money in the fund and actually were behind the creation of the fund. And over 50% of those founding members are based in the US, and one of our partners is actually based in the US. And so we do have very strong ties with the US. And given that a number of our companies do look to the US as the next market, what we tend to do is really start to nurture those relationships, and we're in regular contact with VCs over in the US, whereby when they do come to raising or thinking about expansion, we really do tap into that network to help them along that path.
Right. And then on my end, I mentioned I am an example, I guess, of a collaborative VC where my partners are in London and I'm based in Chicago. And I think, especially, and this goes to the prior fintech question as well, given Chicago's center as a financial hub and London's role as the fintech and financial center in Europe, there's, especially amongst the fintech VCs, I think a lot of collaboration there. Another question that we have would be from Amir Rahman, who has a startup in the construction industry, and he's planning to work on robotics to help people in construction. And he's just wondering if there are any VCs in London, or more than VCs, just the infrastructure in London or Chicago focus on construction. I know we tend to think of like higher, or sometimes think of like higher, sexier tech than construction, but I think there is tremendous amount of opportunity for technology innovation in this space. Would anyone be able to talk about more traditional industries and the opportunities, especially in construction in Chicago or London? If not, I'm happy to weigh in here too.
I can. Okay, I'll just very, very quickly. So in London, obviously, well, say it sounds obvious. There's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of houses here. So obviously, prop tech is there, and we work with quite closely with Land Securities, with one of the big sort of FTSE 100 companies, and they are, looking at, okay, particularly sort of sustainable and coming up with new solutions around that side of things. There is a dedicated prop tech, it's called Pi Labs, which is has been going for a number of years, I think sort of 5, 6 years now. So it depends on your stage, but that's quite a good opportunity. And we see a couple of kind of niche kind of prop tech VCs. A lot of them tend to be still on the kind of software side, so it's interesting. But to be honest, I mean, if you wanted to, I don't know how you can get in touch, or you want to link in with me and send me a pitch pack, I'm happy to sort of have a think about who I can send that to.
Within Chicago, I'd say like the best resource is Built Worlds, which is actually sort of an event and media organization, but has a lot of the construction firms and prop tech VCs sort of all focused on it. So that's a really great hub. They're actually based here. There's a firm called Shadow Ventures. I think they're out of Atlanta actually, but they have a guy called Nick Durham on the ground here. You should reach out to them. Modern Ventures does a lot around real estate tech as well, but not exclusively real estate tech. And yeah, I think if it's got a robotics component, then I think you fall into deep tech as well, and you can trade off the construction versus the robotics interest levels. But construction's one sector where there's a lot of corporate capital interested in sort of putting money to work in terms of funding innovation there as well.
I also mentioned previously, this is more around manufacturing, but there's a group called MHub, which is focused on digital manufacturing, which has a number of touch points, obviously, into the construction industry. So I think you'll find with so many of these questions, you can definitely, if it's not just one, if it's not hitting the nail directly on the head, you're right around the perimeter of it, but both in London and in Chicago, you have a number of resources, VCs and startups, and an overall community, really for any industry, I think that you're trying to touch upon. We have another question around corporate venture capital firms, and if there's increased activity given the current environment. I don't know, Andrew or Yvonne, if you ever interact much with corporate VCs in your space, if you're comfortable or know the answer in London, what the corporate VC climate is like.
Yeah, so we do interact with a few corporate VCs, and you know, given the current environment, the VCs that we do interact with have seen a slowdown in activity, just given the very nature that, you know, sometimes obviously these are attached to large businesses, and if they are hit financially, then that obviously has an impact on the venture capital arm of things. So we've definitely noticed a slowdown in that activity. However, I think the great thing is, you know, corporate venture capital firms in recent years have been increasingly more active, and I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, if I can speak on behalf of Chicago as a former corporate VC person myself, I agree completely that there's been an increased amount of sophistication by corporate VCs. This is not the dumb money of the past that would go in and out with a bubble and the bubble bursting. But what is interesting right now is obviously we're still in the middle of a tremendous uncertainty where the priority for a corporation has to be on its core business. And a lot of venture activities tends to be outside of that core, focus on adjacent or transformational innovation. So it can be hard to prioritize and say, oh yes, we really need to be adding more risk to our company now, as opposed to just shoring up the base of operations. But I personally haven't seen there being a dramatic pullback in corporate VCs, similar to what we saw with the dot-com bubble bursting when some corporations were dipping their toes in there. So for the last question to everyone, and I also just want to say that there have been some other questions in the thread, one related to intellectual property protection, another related to digital pathology startup investing. I'm not sure if everyone on this, the VC investors on this chat right now have the direct expertise to answer, but as previously mentioned, we have a number of touch points in common. So to continue some of these more specific questions, you know, feel free to reach out to Kyle from World Business Chicago, Jonathan from London Partners, or feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll try to be a good Sherpa to you through both the Chicago and London ecosystems. But the last question then from the panelists is, please let us know the one thing from an investment standpoint that you're looking forward to once this coronavirus thing passes, or even if it doesn't, if this is our new normal, what is giving you the most hope as an investor as you look ahead? With Andrew, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I think certainly the UK, I think the government response in terms of the kind of recovery package is very much aimed at kind of bounce back better and the whole support for the sector. So I can see that, yeah, redirecting a lot of the kind of innovation agencies are looking at for a sustainability angle in terms of what they're providing. And I think that's going to really leverage the equity with kind of this non-dilutive grant funding that's going to come into the sector. So I can see that in itself is going to continue to accelerate the kind of the deal flow and the companies, as well as providing sort of a greater runway. And I think, although obviously there's a wider economic sort of the overall GDP numbers are going to still continue to suffer, I think the sectors we're focused on, I think will recover more strongly than ever. So yes, I'm looking forward to 2021. I think we're going to be aiming to raise a much more significant fund during that period. We were in right at the starting blocks at the time when the crisis hit. but as soon as we can get back to sort of meeting people and meeting LPs again, I'm pretty confident. Okay, of course, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, so I'm always going to be optimistic. So don't listen to me.
Right. Samara, what makes you very hopeful as you look ahead?
Yeah, I love this kind of democratization of investing and you know, founders having access to investors and vice versa. You know, this has taught us that you don't necessarily need to be in front of somebody to get access. Even with me, I've gotten access to a lot of potential LPs and other top managers that I wouldn't have gotten access to because of some of these programs that are remote. You know, me being in Chicago and a lot of them being in San Francisco. And I'm seeing that with founders as well as obtaining access to talent that is not in San Francisco, that is in other places like Chicago, like London, right? You don't necessarily need to be in the same city anymore. So I'm really excited about that piece of democratizing the whole process and access to capital, which will ultimately impact and affect who gets funded, both from a founder's perspective as well as from an investor's perspective.
Right. And Jonathan, please share what you're hopeful for, but also plug your conference this fall, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of stemmed from what Samara was saying, that, you know, the barriers to connecting virtually are very low. And so, you know, I spent a lot of time in the last 4 years running around, you know, the different ecosystems in the Midwest, and there's always lots of events happening connecting founders and investors in one place. But typically it's sort of state focused or city focused or, you know, particular organization. And so the idea is just to scale that up and like connect the dots across the whole region virtually. So it's free for founders to apply. Midwest.tech is the site if you want to learn more. The event's called Midwest Tech Connect. And we're going to try and match up as many early stage founders and angels and VCs as possible. And if there's overflow, we'll do it by email after the fact, but we're going to have a 3-day virtual summit. And then what I'm hopeful for, I mean, just quickly, you know, it's a bit of an overly used phrase, but necessity is the mother of invention. And I feel like 2020 has had so many problems that were there already, but have really been magnified. And so I think that pressure, while it feels bad this year, is actually going to create innovations that I think will hopefully play out in the future to sort of like alleviate some of these problems. So I might be being naive. I definitely have the entrepreneurial optimism mindset as well, Andrew. But you know, I think that, you know, something good could come of all this year.
That's right. And then Yvonne, we'll close with you on all that you're looking forward to as an investor.
Yeah, I guess echoing Jonathan and Samara's sentiments, I think COVID-19 is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build truly global startups. You know, many more startups might adopt globally distributed teams, and I think it's also leveling the playing field in terms of access to investors, and that's something that I've heard a lot about within the ecosystem already. And for me, another thing is, you know, as we saw in the aftermath of the financial crisis, there were new business models that emerged addressing the new. And I believe that, you know, we're in a period where we're going to see a lot of innovation emerge from this current pandemic, and that's what I'm really excited about.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to turn it back to Andy Zopp from World Business Chicago for some closing words. But I also want to say myself thank you to all of the panelists. And on my end, no police person asked me to move, or no one ordered a Big Mac from me. So this was successful on my side as well. Andy, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
So I just want to, first of all, thank you, Rumi, and thank all of our panelists, Andrew, Yvonne, Jonathan, Samara. You were terrific. We got incredible, great comments in the chat room, and you provided some great insights and about what's been happening and what's going to happen. And I thought the ending comments were particularly useful and helpful to remind us that we have hope, that there is opportunity, and that the world has, I think, improved for startups and particularly for startups who have struggled to find access to capital. I thought, Samara, your comment about the democratization of the ecosystems was really important. So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. As you have heard, this partnership is a strong and important one between London and Chicago, but equally important, this is a great time for us. The world is changing. Innovation is going to make a huge difference here. The world that we knew is not going to be the world that we're going to be functioning in when we come out of COVID. But that's not a bad thing. It's going to be an exciting opportunity, and hopefully it'll be one where we can continue to expand opportunity and inclusion in this space that is going to be so important to all of our economy. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to London and Partners for joining us, for hosting this today. We really appreciate it, and I hope everyone stays well and healthy. Take care.